Hey, my name's Jay and welcome to Verse by Verse. Today we're going to be talking about how Paul went to the Gentiles and how big of a deal that actually is for a Jewish person to go to the Gentiles. If you're new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button, and if you've been liking what you see, please hit that like button as well. Again, my name's Jay and welcome to Verse by Verse. Now let's get into it. Today we're going to be in Galatians, picking up in chapter 1, verse 16, so let's get going. And verse 16 says this: "To reveal his Son in me in order that I might preach him among the Gentiles, and I did not immediately confer with flesh and blood." Okay, so the first thing we get to see here is we get to see that, God is revealing himself to Paul, but also through Paul, right? On the road to Damascus, Jesus revealed himself to Paul and said, "Hey, look, you're going the wrong direction. You're fighting against me. Wake up. And now that you're awake, I'm going to have you work for me for the rest of your life." And not only did he reveal himself to him, but he also revealed himself, is revealing himself through Paul. And he's still doing that today, right? We're still reading his letters and finding out what it looks like to live under grace and following the Christ example that Paul established for us. So with that in mind, let's keep going. The second thing we get to see is preach among the Gentiles, right? The reason why God revealed himself to Paul and through Paul is because he was supposed to go preach among the Gentiles. And this is the thing that this area right here that I think about is that this word preach, it's an audible thing, right? It's not this writing down of the message. It's something that I have in my mind because his goal was to go out there and hoof it all around, right? Go all around, tell people about the message that he received. And you don't see my goal is to write down everything. Just notice that his goal wasn't to write it down. His goal was to get out there and tell everybody about it. And then, when he was done telling people, he was hearing that churches needed a little more information, and he was sending some of these letters that we have today, thank goodness. And that's how we get to piece things together. But back then, he just went out and was telling people verbally, this is the message and this is what you need to know. So that's very important. But where did he go? He went to the Gentiles, right? He went to the Gentiles. If you don't know who the Gentiles are, there's really just two groups of people, okay? There's the Jews and there's the Gentiles. And if you're not Jewish, then you're Gentile. That's pretty much it, right? That's the way it is. So that's what Gentiles is. Confer and consult. Why? After he got his message, he didn't confer, he didn't consult with flesh and blood, right? He didn't do that. He didn't immediately look for humans and say, "Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that?" No, he didn't do that. He kept to himself, and that's what we're going to find out here. He didn't go and immediately seek counsel, right? He didn't do that. He did not go see flesh and blood. Just know that his authority came from God, his message came from God, and he didn't immediately after receiving the message go seek out wise counsel and say, "What do you think about this message that I have?" No, he just went and spread his message out. Okay, that's what we need to recognize here. And who did he spread it to? He spread it to the Gentiles, didn't he? Now that's what we can see in this verse. But now I want to talk a little bit about how the Bible works, okay? And what we should be thinking about when we're reading the Bible. So I really wish that when I first became a believer, which doesn't seem very long ago for me, that somebody would have told me this is how the Bible works. But nobody did that. Okay, nobody did that. I started to get really confused. And God, blessed me with just going to seminary and getting more confused. And then finally starting to shine a little bit of light after my first year there, right? It's not the seminary that did it. It's just that you spend enough time in the Bible that you start to piece some things together. But I was also getting some very good teaching from some very godly men, and so I just want to thank them so much for doing that. But how the Bible works, what we want to think about here is we want to think about the Bible as history, okay? The documents that we're reading are historical documents, right? Passed down through the centuries, right? And we still get to go to them and read about them and read them. And what do they hold? They hold true events, right? They hold true events. They actually happened. You can plot them on a timeline. And a lot of times we like to mix, or separate Christian history and, secular history, and we don't like to put them together, except for on rare occasions. But I'm telling you, you need to put them together and keep them together. Just keep them together. Don't separate them. They are history. Just plot them together. No more separation. Just keep them together. And when you read the Bible, put on your historical thinking cap, and the Bible is going to make a lot more sense to you. And here we go. I'm going to show you how to do that. So today, how the Bible works, we're going to talk about perspective. Okay? Perspective. I don't know if you liked art in school. I really liked art in school. I wasn't very good at it, okay? I could draw the stick figure pretty good. I was pretty good at that. But anything beyond that, drawing a hand, that's the hardest thing I think that anybody can try to draw, right? But they have a way of drawing in perspective, right? You've learned the first perspective when you want to draw that train track, right? That railroad track that goes into one point, and then it allows you to have, the telephone poles lining straight up and not just laying down. That's the perspective, right? But then there's 2-point perspective, and man, that's amazing because now you can build a house, right? You can draw a house, you can draw a box, you can draw the sides of the box, but there's something good about 2-point perspective is that you can show the bottom of the box, you can show the top of the box, or you can show the side of the box, depending on what perspective you're looking at, right? Or you're using, or where your horizon line is, or where your eye is going to be going, right? But it's still 2-point perspective. But there is 3-point perspective as well, right? And there's probably more. I never got farther than 3-point perspective, to be honest with you. But if you like superheroes, which if you haven't noticed, I like Batman a lot. If you read comic books, they're going to be, I think, now don't hold me to this, but I think they're going to be using 3-point perspective because you're not only seeing the top of the building, but you can also see it stretching down. And so it gives you this stretched look, which is super cool, which isn't something that you really get in 2-point perspective. In 3-point, you can see it kind of vanishing down into, out of view, but you can also see the top and the sides, and it's really cool. I like 3-point. I've never really advanced in it. But besides just art, perspective can go into our Bibles as well, okay? Not just the drawing, but this is what it's about. So when it comes to perspective in the Bible, there's 3 perspectives that you need to be aware of. Okay, there are 3 main perspectives that you need to be aware of. And the first one is the Christian perspective. And that perspective is you and me, and the cross is the hinge. Okay, all the events before the cross helped bring the cross into existence. And all of the events after the cross helped bring into existence. That's the Christian perspective. Okay, just in a nutshell, that's the Christian perspective. Now, there was this picture that I saw once, and it was probably at Hobby Lobby, maybe not, but I almost bought it, but I think it was overpriced, so I didn't buy it. But however, it was a picture of the baby Jesus, and behind baby Jesus, lying in a manger, there was this like bat signal being shown forth, and the cross was shadowing behind him, and it was like a beacon, right, for that cross. And I said to myself, that's the Christian perspective. We're looking at baby Jesus knowing that the cross is going to come. That's the Christian perspective. And the thing you need to be aware of when it comes to the Christian perspective is you need to know it exists, and you need to know that for most of this, you kind of want to put that Christian perspective in a little bag, tie it up, seal it up, and go put it over to the side for a moment, because we don't want that to hinder us as we're going to try and observe what's in the Bible by itself. Okay, there's other perspectives that we need to hold on to first, and then we go grab that little bag that holds our Christian perspective, bring it back in, and say, this is for us. This is what we need to know about it. Okay, so that's what you need to know about the Christian perspective. Know it exists so that you can keep it separate. Okay, keep it separate. The second perspective is the author's perspective. Okay, the author's perspective. So when you're reading a letter, when you're reading a book, you want to know who the author is, right? And then you want to know their backstory. But not only that, when it comes to the author's perspective, there's this time delay feature in the author's perspective. There's the time in which the event takes place, and then there's the time that the account is written. Okay, and that could be 20 years later, that could be 30 years later, and you need to know what was going on during that time where he was writing, right? That's important, but it's also important to understand what's going on when he's writing, or when that account is being taken place. Okay, so you need to be able to keep those things separate. Now, the best way that I can describe this is that we have 4 Gospels, okay, and 3 of those Gospels, the great scholars of the day have determined that those are called the Synoptic Gospels. And if you know them, repeat them with me. They're Matthew, Mark, and Luke, right? Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the Synoptic Gospels. But then there is one that's not a Synoptic Gospel, part of the Holy Trio. There, it's John, right? And the reason why is because he kind of takes a different approach to the gospel, right? The other 3 are like, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. And John's like, hey, let me tell you a little bit about Jesus, something you might not know. I'm just going to fill in some information, right? So he takes this other way of telling some of the same events. However, it's been thought, and I don't know if I buy into this, okay, but I'm just going to tell you what's been thought. What's been thought is that he writes his super late, okay, super late, and grace has existed for a long time, and he also knows Paul's message, and so he writes it in light of the Pauline epistles, right? He writes it with grace in mind. That could very well be. I mean, he wrote it later in life, so that very well could be, and that could be why it sounds different. I don't know and nobody knows for realsies, right? Nobody knows for realsies if that's the case, but the author's perspective is key in knowing that. You can also get the author's perspective to help with knowing the audience, right? The audience in which he's writing to. It's if he didn't have to explain something to the audience, you have to assume that the audience would know what the author is talking about. So let's use, for example, the synagogue, right? Let's use the example for the synagogue. So he says, the Jews went to synagogue to worship. Well, if he's writing to a group of people that know what a synagogue is, he probably isn't going to say, and the Jews went to the synagogue, and the synagogue is a place where the Jews go to worship, and they do this and that and the other, and then he goes on with his story. That's you can get audience from the author's perspective. So the other thing you can get from the author's perspective, which is super important, is the author's knowledge when he was writing, okay? And that's really easy to spot in Matthew. Matthew will tell you the story, and then he'll tell you why that event took place, and then, backed up with an Old Testament quote or something, and then that had to happen, so this would happen. And so when he says that has to happen, so this would happen, that's the author's perspective, the author's knowledge inside that letter, inside that book. That's the author's knowledge. And before that, that was the account that took place. So the author's perspective gives us a ton of information, and you need to know who the author is so you can fill in what that would be like. So let's talk about the last one. The last one we have here I call the real-time perspective, and this is key. And this is something that myself, I have to make a conscious effort to do. The author's perspective, I think it just kind of flies off the page. The Christian perspective, well, we got that. We know what that is. But what about this real-time perspective? This is where the studying comes in, and this is where the brain and the and history have to meet, right? A lot of studying goes into this part. And what this is, the real-time perspective, is, seeing it through the eyes of those who lived it. It's basically strapping on their sandals, no matter how uncomfortable that would be, and walking a mile in their shoes, right? They didn't have Nike back then. They had, like Birkenstocks, right? They had those kinds of things on their feet, right? And they walked miles, right? They walked miles. So putting yourself in the character's perspective, seeing it through their eyes, is so key that we should be doing its own video on that, because that is how you get to understand the Bible. You need to know who you're reading about. If you're reading about Joseph, learn as much as you can about Joseph and know what he would be thinking about as you're reading that account. Okay, it's very key. It's very key. So we're going to continue with the real-time perspective, and I'm going to just bring this home because this is something I use all the time. And so you actually have subcategories in this real-time perspective, okay? And you need to have the two. The first one is the Jewish perspective, okay? You have the Jewish perspective, and the second one is you have the Gentile perspective, okay? And I know the Gentile perspective pretty good, but you still need to be in the time frame in which you're reading, right? So you got to go back in time and you got to study the Gentiles' perspective for the time in which you're reading, right? Same thing with Jewish perspective. If you're learning about the Jewish way today, that's not going to be as helpful as learning about the Jewish time back in the Bible times, right? That's more important. So with the Jewish perspective, let's use that first. You need to know about the Orthodox Jewish perspective back in the first century and before, right? That's what you need to learn. And really, there's a couple groups here. There's the Pharisees, the Sadducees. I guess there's three groups. There's the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the scribes. And you need to spend a little bit of time, just do a quick Google search and read about each of those groups and know how to spot them. Because when you come to them in the Bible, you're going to want to be able to say, oh, they're a Pharisee, they're a Sadducee, or they're a scribe, or they're part of the Sanhedrin. You want to know who it is you're reading about, right? You want it right up here. You want to have it right up here. Don't wait for your pastor to give it to you. That's cheating. Go ahead and get this for yourself. Go ahead and get it into your mind so that you yourself will have this Orthodox perspective as best you can, okay? Never going to have a perfect one. Never going to be able to know what that would be like exactly, but have it in your mind. Even if you want to do some of the feasts so that you understand what it would be like. Not that you have to do them, but you want to do them so you would know what it would kind of be like for them. That's a great way. Bring it home, teach the kids, let them see what it would be like to do some of these things. It's perfect. It allows you to get into the mindset of what the Orthodox Jewish people would be thinking about. Okay? The next one is the Hellenistic perspective. Right, the Jewish perspective. There's the Hellenistic perspective, and really these are the progressive Jews. Okay, these are the ones that kind of took on the Greek mindset. All right, and you need to know about that. They are also following the law, right? But they kind of have their own scripture, and it's called the Septuagint. Right, they have their own Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. So this is stuff that you need to put into your mind so that you can have that perspective. And the last one is the Judaizers, okay? The Judaizers. That's what you need to have in your mind. And the Judaizers really, they knew who Jesus was, but they also were holding on to certain parts of the law. Now, this is a question, and I'm not going to answer it for you today. This is the question. Was there a time in which the Judaizers were in the right? Think about that. Was there a time when the Judaizers were in the right and they weren't wrong? Okay, it's a question. You should try to answer it. But these three groups, you need to be able to spot them, and you need to know who belongs to these groups, right? So, for example, if you watched my last video, you would know that Paul, before he became the Apostle Paul, right, he would be in that Orthodox Jew category, right? And you would want to know who a Pharisee is and try to figure that out so you could know his backstory. That's the group he would be in, okay? So just know that that exists, and you want to know so that when you read in the Bible, a phrase that says, oh, okay, wait a minute, what group of people are these? Then you can put them into that, and you can gain that perspective, and you can be real time with them. Real time, not bringing your Christian perspective in, but being with the character in which you're reading about. It's super important, and it'll make the Bible come so much more alive to you. Okay, so now we have the Gentile perspective, and basically, if you're reading in the Old Testament, you've got the past empires, right? You need to know about the past empires, so you can start, all the way back in Egypt, right, which is absolutely one of my favorite ones to learn about, right? There's just so much going on in the Egyptian empire. And then you can also, you'll also want to know about Babylon, right? But then you're also going to want to know about the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Jebusites and all the other ites that are in there. And so you got some reading to do if you want to know about the past empires. But really, if you're in the New Testament, it's really Roman, right? You want to know about the Roman perspective, and you also want to know about Greek, right? I think there was a famous historian, I don't remember his name, but he said that Rome took over Greek, but Greek took over Rome, because basically Rome, and that's a very loose translation, by the way, that's not exactly what he said, but it's basically that Rome took over Greece, but the Romans loved the Greek way of living, so they kind of adopted that into their way of living, right? They liked their columns, they liked their way of building, and they liked that they were good thinkers. So they kind of took that, but they took them over, but they let them take the culture over, right? So that's kind of the perspective there. So this is the perspective you want to have in your mind as we continue forward in the Bible. And that's the real-time perspective. So now we're going to take this just one step farther, and I'm going to do hopefully like a word picture for you, just in case what I've been putting in there in words doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense to me, but sometimes, it's just for me, and for you, I want you to be able to really get that as well. So just to make sure that I'm making sense, I just wanted to take it another step farther. So here we have a timeline. Okay, this yellow bar represents the timeline, and here we're going to put a character there, and you're going to see that this is the real perspective. So if you're reading about Joseph, let's just say, okay, and you're reading about Joseph, that's who you want to know about. You want to know what he would be thinking about, what he's doing, and you also want to ask, how is God working with mankind while Joseph is living out his life? Is it under law or is it under grace? You want to get into that character. You want to know what he's thinking about. Okay? It's very key. It's very key. So then, we're going to go ahead and put this big brick wall between our character and the future. Okay? We don't want him to be able to know anything past what we're reading about. Okay? We don't want him to be able to know anything about the future. The only way that he could know about the future is if God told him about it. Right? And said, hey, your son's going to save, his people from their sins. Okay? So if he has that, well, yes, he knows that in the future, Jesus is going to save his people from their sins. But at this particular moment, that would be all he would have, right? He wouldn't have anything more than that, right? He would just have what he knows up until this point. So this is key. Then we're going to get the author's perspective. And you can see the author gets his, knowledge from the future, right? He has future knowledge, but he also is writing about something in the past, right? He's writing about Joseph's life. So you need to try and keep those two perspectives separate, right? He's writing from the other side into the future about something that happened in the past. But while you're reading that account that happened in the past, please stay in the past. It's really important that you don't mix time frames. If you start mixing time frames and you just grab this time frame, put it in the blender, hit mix, it all comes out as mush. And I'm going to tell you right now that is a very confusing place to be when you're reading the Bible. So don't let that happen to you. Don't let it happen. Okay, so then we're going to talk about the last perspective. And the last perspective, as you can see, is the Christian perspective. And that perspective hovers over everything, right? You and I get the pleasure of seeing everything all at one time, right? But we have to be on our guard against our perspective, because we could say, well, this happened so that this could happen, and that happened so that this could happen, and that happened so that this could happen, and we might forget that the character in which we're reading about, or the account that we're reading about, the characters only know so much. Okay, the characters only know so much, and we need to remember that we need to live in their time. We need to let them shine in their time. So now let's go to the concept of Paul going to the Gentiles. Now, for us, this isn't a big deal, right? The Christian perspective, Paul's been going to the Gentiles for 2,000 years. It's no big deal, right? And we're still reading about how Paul went to the Gentiles. I don't even blink an eye when I hear this. But as you can see on the screen here, you have the Jews in one circle and you have the Gentiles in the other circle. And for a Jew to say he's going to the Gentiles, that's a big deal. If you read one of the synoptic gospels, take your pick, one of the holy trio, just take your pick. But I like Matthew a lot, so I read Matthew a lot. So Matthew, you'll find that when Gentiles come to Jesus, they're like, you don't have to come to my house. I'm not worthy of you doing that, but you can just say the word, and my servant will be healed. And you can see that there is this culture of not being with Gentiles. Okay, it's pretty obvious as you're reading the Bible that Jews and Gentiles, they just didn't come together, and they definitely didn't eat together. Okay, that was something that just wasn't going to happen, right? So now we're going to talk a little bit about this concept using Peter. Okay, in Peter chapter 10 of Acts, okay? And so I'm going to read this to you. But Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean." And that's Acts 10:14. Okay? And if you do it right, this really rhymes. I have never eaten anything common or unclean. Acts 10:14, right? Like that. You can come up with your own rhythm or whatever, but this is really key, okay? And this is one of those blink and you'll miss it moments. If you didn't watch the last video, you're going to want to check out that one for the blink and you'll miss it moments, because they're all the way through the Bible. But knowing the proper perspective when you're reading this is key to getting these blink and you'll miss it moments. But here we can see that up to this point, Peter is saying, with God as his witness, that he hasn't eaten anything common or unclean in Acts 10:14, right? That's key. Now let's talk about the story here. Let's go into the account here. So Peter goes up. Maybe he needs fresh air. He goes up onto the rooftop and he gets hungry. And God lowers down this sheet, right? And inside this sheet, kind of like this tablecloth, are unclean animals, right? If you don't know what the unclean animals are, I would highly recommend Leviticus 11, okay? So, but the unclean animals are there, and he's like, what? And God says, Peter, kill and eat, right? And this is what Peter tells God, right? No. No, if this is a test, God, I failed the first one. I'm not going to fail this one. There's no way I'm failing this one, right? I denied you 3 times, failed, but you welcomed me back. And this time, I'm not going to fail this test. I know this is a test and I'm not going to fail it. But what does God do? He tells him again, right? Tells him again, and that's key, right? That's key. And so guess what happens? He goes to Cornelius's home, who is a Roman cohort, right? He's a Gentile. And he probably has a pork sandwich. Okay? This is probably the first time he's had anything. Well, this is the first time that he's going to have anything that's common or unclean. Right? Because he says about it in Acts 10:14, right? That's what he says. So, it makes me think about the song, it's raining pork. Hallelujah, it's raining pork. Amen. Like that, right? It was probably the first time that he got to eat something that was, it was definitely the first time that he got to eat something that was common or unclean. So, that's important. But guess what happens when he gets back? When he gets back, now the apostles and the brethren who were in Judea heard that the Gentiles had also received the word of God. And when Peter came to Jerusalem, those of the circumcision contended with him, saying, you went to uncircumcised men and ate with them. And that's found in Acts 11:1 through 3. Okay, so they heard that, the Gentiles received the word of the Lord, and that Peter brought that to them, and that he went to uncircumcised people, right? That's what happened. That's what Peter did. How dare you, Peter, right? How dare you? Okay, so these guys hear of the circumcision. I just want to let you know, if you hear of the circumcision and they're not trying to kill Peter, well, they're not Orthodox Jews, and they're not Hellenistic Jews. If this was part of that group of people, and we needed to grab that perspective, we would then be reading, and they grabbed Peter, drug him off, and they tried to stone him. That's probably what you would find if we were reading about that group of people. Okay? But we're not. We're not reading about the Orthodox. We're not reading about the Hellenistic. Guess who these people are? They're going to be Judaizers, okay? They're going to be believers in Christ, but they're also going to be thinking that the law needs to be followed. The law needs to be followed, and it's logical. Let me tell you this. You need to be in their perspective. It's logical. God gave the law to mankind, and mankind has been following the law for years and years and years and years, and now this. A Jew is going to the Gentiles. What? That's not okay. We've been following the law. We need to keep the law. That's what the Judaizers are thinking. And God is trying to change that, is starting to change that, right? Now the question is, like I mentioned before, was there a time when the Judaizers weren't in the wrong? That they could follow Christ and still need to follow the law? Think about that. Think about that. Okay, so here we have a group of people that know Peter and aren't trying to kill him. So they've got to be close to Peter, and they're trying to tell him, hey, how dare you go to the Gentiles? Okay, now guess what happens there? And then he said, and this is his answer to them. Then he said to them, you know how unlawful it is for a Jewish man to keep company with or go to one of another nation, but God has shown me that I should not call man common or unclean. Okay, Peter, so that's kind of interesting, because he actually mentioned that animals weren't common and unclean, and you're taking it as man isn't common or unclean. Isn't interesting? It's very interesting, right? It's very interesting. So yes, that was the moral of the story, that God is trying to say, hey, Gentiles are not common and unclean anymore, because I'm going to start working with them. I'm going to start working with the Gentiles. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. So don't be doing that. So Peter picked up on it, definitely, but it's interesting, and that's another one of those blink and you'll miss it moments, and you need to be aware of that. But now, I don't know if you've read the law. I have. I'm not an expert in the law, but I don't see this that Peter's talking about. Okay, it doesn't seem unlawful for a man or for a Jew to be with Gentile. Be with the Gentiles. It doesn't seem truly unlawful. Yeah, I had a hard time coming up with, like that. Yeah, so Peter, I need verse, and I need chapter, and I need to know where you found it, because I don't know where you're getting this information. But we do know a little bit about this and what he could be thinking about. And so I want to bring this up so that you can gain this Orthodox perspective. Okay, I want you to gain this Orthodox perspective. So there's the idea of the sages that had, that kind of had, it's better safe than sorry mentality. Okay, the better safe than sorry mentality. And don't think that the Christians don't do the same thing. Like, we do the same thing, and I'm going to bring that up here in a minute. But the first thing you need to know about is what Peter might be speaking of here, and that is that they have some laws about food, right? They have laws about food, and they also have laws about idol worship. Okay, and if you're a Gentile, you pretty much come into the idea of idol worship if you are not following God, right? There's followers of God, and then there's followers of non-God God, right? There's the idol worshippers. And if you were Jewish and you were to eat food with a Gentile, you just might eat something that is not properly prepared, but also sacrificed to idols. Okay, so that's the idea. And the sages came up with this great idea. Okay, it's better safe than sorry. So not only do we not want to even, be with them and eat with them, we don't want to have anything to do with them so that we don't accidentally eat something sacrificed to idols or prepared wrong. Okay? These are all laws that you can find. Just Google search it, like Jewish eating laws, and you're going to find a whole bunch of stuff to read about. Right? There's a lot of stuff about how a Jew needs to prepare it, but if a Gentile does something, then it's not kosher anymore. And there's a bunch of stuff. I just couldn't figure out if this was actually in existence back in that time or not. But there is something that's making Peter think that this is in existence back then, that you're not supposed to be with Gentiles. Okay? That's it's so much that he thinks it's unlawful. Okay? So that's key right there. So just to put this into a Christian perspective, the Bible really isn't against drinking alcohol, right? No matter what you think, no matter whether you think that you can or you can't. Look, the Bible isn't against it, all right? The Bible doesn't come out and say that. But since Peter decides to give us this idea of being sober-minded, we probably should be sober-minded. And if you're drunk, you really can't be sober-minded, right? That's where we get this concept, this idea. And we have taken the it's better safe than sorry approach, just like they have. Better safe than sorry. Don't even touch it. Don't even think about it. Don't drink it. Because if you drink it, you might be able to get drunk. And then you wouldn't be sober-minded anymore. So that's the concept. Better safe than sorry. We do the same thing. They did the same thing. Perspective is very key. And so then when they heard these things, they became silent, and they glorified God, saying, then God has granted to the Gentiles repentance to life. And that's Acts 11:18. And there was singing and dancing, and there was amazing partying going on, right? Now, that doesn't say any of that. And then they went and they spread the word to the Gentiles because they knew that God was working with the Gentiles. Man, I wish that would have been the case. I do wish that was the case. Peter just said that's what was happening, and these guys said, that's amazing that God is offering this repentance to life. That's amazing. So we're going to go tell some more Gentiles. That is not what he says. Now those who were scattered after the persecution that arose over Stephen traveled as far as Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Antioch, preaching the word to no one but the Jews only. Acts 11:19. Now it's hard to know if this is just right after that, okay? Just to let you know. But let me go back 1 minute. But it is the verse that happens right after, right? It is the verse that happens right after. So this could have happened earlier. I don't know, to be honest with you. But it's just kind of comical and kind of interesting that, Peter just told them, this has come to the Gentiles. And then they go out there and they're not telling Gentiles, they're telling Jews only. But the one thing you need to know about this is that when they were scattered out, okay, and that happened back in Acts 8, right? Those who were scattered out, did they go to Gentiles? No, they didn't go to Gentiles. They went to Jews only. Jews only, okay? That's what happens. They only go to the Jews. It's a very key that you understand that, because the concept of Paul going to the Gentiles is humongous. A Jew saying he's going to the Gentiles is big and amazing. Now Galatians 1:17, let's continue. Okay, neither did I go up to Jerusalem to them who were apostles before me, but I went away unto Arabia, and again I returned unto Damascus. Okay, so here we're going to see that, Paul did not go up to Jerusalem, right? He didn't go up to Jerusalem. And the concept here, this is one of those blink and you'll miss it moments that's trying to help us out up unto Jerusalem. If you don't know this, if you haven't been to the Holy Land, if you haven't seen many of the pictures or not, that Jerusalem is basically a city on a hill, right? You have to go up to Jerusalem. Now, if he's in Damascus, which you remember he was on the road to Damascus, then he goes to Damascus. If he's in Damascus, to get to Jerusalem, he's going to have to go south. So how is it that, when we think about it, going up to, that would be north and south, going down. Well, here is an elevation thing, right? It's kind of going up and down in elevation. So, I don't know if you've gone hiking or if you've gone to Mount St. Helens. I live pretty close to that. So, if you're going up there, as you're driving up, your ears pop, right? And then as you come back down, your ears pop or whatever. And so that's what I think about when you're going up to Jerusalem. Maybe your ears are popping as you're going up to Jerusalem because it is a city on a hill. And this is just one of those key things that allows you to kind of get involved in the geography of the Bible time, okay, and of the Bible land. But in Acts 8, that's on there because, why would he need to go to Jerusalem? Why do you think he would need to go to Jerusalem? Acts chapter 8 has a key, but then this here, the apostles before me, right? The apostles that were before him, they were still in Jerusalem, and that's in Acts chapter 8. Okay, there was a dispersion that took place, but the apostles stayed behind. And so why would he need to go to Jerusalem? Because the apostles are there, right? That's why he would go there if he wanted to, right? But he's telling us he didn't go there. He didn't go and confer or consult with the apostles before him, right? He stayed separate. It's really key that we understand that. And in Acts chapter 2, or no, not in Acts chapter 2, in Galatians chapter 2, he calls these apostles pillars, okay? And he's not the only one that calls the fathers pillars. Clement, right? Good old Clement, he calls them pillars as well. So it's just a reference to those who are basically strong in the church, right? The ones that the church is being built upon, right? That's kind of what a pillar is, right? It's those that are kind of the structure of everything, right? But we need to recognize that he didn't have to go to them. He didn't have to go to them. He didn't have to get their blessing because God gave him a message that was separate. Gave him a message that was separate, and he's doing a lot to stay separate. Didn't go immediately to Jerusalem, and didn't go and talk to the apostles, keeping it separate. But then where did he go? He went to Arabia and then back to Damascus. Okay? He went to Arabia and then he went back to Damascus. So this, there's a concept here. There's some talk, in the Christian circles of where this Arabia is. But we're not going to get into that. We just need to know that he went to Arabia and then he went back to Damascus. And now there is an idea, that like in Acts, right? In Acts, there's the Acts chapter 9, and it gives this idea that immediately he went, he got up, taught in Damascus, but there's no mention of Arabia. And a lot of people are trying to put Arabia and that concept and that together, right? And they're spending lots of time, lots of pages writing and trying to figure that out. But let me tell you just real quick, this is Paul's story. Luke might not have known about this trip to Arabia. That's it. He might not have known about this trip to Arabia, and it might have been a short trip, like just a little blip, like just going there and coming back. But I am telling you that Paul isn't lying. He said he went to Arabia and then back to Damascus, and he lived it, and he's the one that I'm going to listen to. But now let's take this idea of Paul trying to remain separate from the other apostles. He's trying to create here in chapter 1 how he got his message from God, he got his authority from God, and now he doesn't need to go to the apostles because it's separate. And he's trying to tell us that he's separate. Now get this. Jesus tells his disciples in Matthew 19:28 that there's going to be 12 apostles, right? There's 12 apostles, and they're going to be sitting on 12 thrones. Right, and I found this little picture here of all the thrones all just staying together. And if I could have found one with like a big circle, that would have been sweet. Like they're all just sitting in this circle. That's kind of how I picture it. They're just all in this circle and they're going to judge the 12 tribes, right? That's what they're going to do. And that's in the kingdom, okay? Just get that. That's in the kingdom. So there's going to be 12 12 apostles on 12 thrones in the kingdom. But as you and I know, there is a 12th apostle, right? But Paul isn't given a throne. There's no talk about Paul having his own throne. He doesn't say, someday I'll get a throne of my own. He doesn't say that, right? He doesn't say that at all. So he's not getting one of those thrones. That's a really key, important point. That there's going to be 12 apostles sitting on 12 thrones, and then there's going to be Paul, who's separate, not sitting on thrones. Okay, not sitting on a throne. Get that? He is set apart, and let's keep him and his message set apart. It's for you and I to do. It's not for Paul to do. He's not alive anymore to do it. It's for you and me to remember that his message was separate, his authority was given from God, and he needs to remain separate from the other 12 apostles. If you want to know what it looks like to live under grace and not under law, you need to be looking at the Apostle Paul. Just start reading his letters, and the Bible's going to make a lot more sense to you. When you start reading other parts of the Bible and trying to fit law into grace, that's when this mixing thing happens, and it gets really confusing. And so that's why I keep saying, when we're thinking about the Bible, the first question I ask is, how is God working with mankind where I'm reading in the Bible? If he's working on the basis of law, then my mindset is law. But when you come to the Apostle Paul, we need to help ourselves remember that he is separate. And so for a recap is this: Paul was sent to preach among the Gentiles, and that was a big deal. And he did not get his authority or his message from mankind, and he did not consult with man in any way. Paul did not go to Jerusalem to consult with the other apostles. Rather, he went to Arabia and then went to Damascus. And I'll leave you with this: Paul went to the Gentiles and was separate from the other apostles, and is still separate from them today. On this idea of perspective, in all three of these things, think about how famous the birth of Christ is. And when it comes to the Christian perspective, it's very famous. We celebrate Christ's birth for a month, right? And if retailers have their way, we'll be celebrating it all year long, right? And as a Christian, yes, we can celebrate it all year long, but there is a month in which we prepare, we put up lights, we put up whatever, and that makes Jesus' birth very famous when it comes to the Christian perspective. When it comes to the author's perspective, it's not famous yet, but they're going to make it famous, right? It's not famous yet, but the author is writing it down so that other people can read about it. Soon to be famous is the way you could think about that. But then the real-time perspective, how famous is the birth of Christ? And it's not famous. Okay, it's not famous. And really, the only people that know about the birth of Christ is Mary, Joseph, and then, right, the shepherds know about it, the angels know about it, right, and then the wise men learn about it and come, and Herod learns about it and tries to kill all the babies and that kind of thing. But it's not famous at all. And in fact, after he's born, he goes to Egypt, right, and escapes the terror of Herod, and it's just a silent thing. It's just silent. Okay? That's the real-time perspective. Seeing the birth of Christ through the eyes of those who lived it, it wasn't a famous ordeal. In fact, the Jews kept doing the same thing. The Savior of the world had entered the world, but the world hadn't changed. Again, my name's Jay, and this has been Verse by Verse. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a blessed week, and I'll see you in the next video. Again, my name's Jay, and this has been Verse by Verse. If you want to check out any music that I've been putting out, that's going to be right over here somewhere. It's really hard to tell, but somewhere down in here, this area is going to have some music. And if you want to see the next teaching video, that's going to be over here somewhere as well. But thank you so much for watching. My name's Jay, This is Verse by Verse. You have a blessed week, and I'll see you in the next video.